According to a new report, experts say that we have until 2030 to avoid catastrophe. It also says if unprecedented changes are not made and made soon, there will be irreversible damage to the planet.
Now are likely having to turn around. But Donna, look at that. Like that, even in the past 5 minutes, has just flared up. And to be honest, I'm not sure how long we'll be able to stay here, but it shows how quickly things are changing.
The rainforests. A place of natural beauty that is unique around the globe. Home to more than 30 million different species of animals that are perfectly adapted to their environment. Trees that grow up to 80 meters. On 5 continents, these vast ecosystems exist, and even though they form a world for themselves, the whole planet is dependent on them. Through photosynthesis, a healthy forest does not only produce oxygen, which is crucial for our survival, it can also absorb more CO2 than it produces, and therefore help regulate the concentration of the gas in the air. The Amazon forest is called green lung of the earth for a reason. It is estimated that about 250 billion tons of CO2 are stored in the rainforests around the globe, which makes them a key factor in the prevention of drastic climate changes. But a new study is very concerning. Scientists examined the amount of CO2 that the tropical forests are filtering out of the air every year. In 1990, it was 46 billion tons. 20 years later, it was only 25 billion tons. A look in the future exposes a scenario even worse. Scientists calculated that in about 10 to 20 years, the ability to filter CO2 could go completely lost in the South American forests, which would be destroying their benefit on global temperatures. Main factors for this horrible development are the rising temperatures and periods of drought and heat. The massive deforestation plays a crucial role as well, with the destruction of an area equal to 3 football fields per minute. So, if we don't stop the climate change soon, we will lose one of our biggest natural allies in the fight against CO2, the rainforests.
Climate change isn't just something that's only happening around us. Each year, we in the moderate regions experience the effects of climate change ourselves. Can you remember the last winter, when snow was no exception? Not an event that lasted maybe a day or two, but a regular thing? Probably not. However, what we all remember with concern are the summers that are unusually hot. Every year, heat records get broken. Not just in countries like Spain or France, but in the north as well. When watering your plants or filling up your private swimming pool gets forbidden, even the most ignorant people will face the problem of the unstoppable heat. Burning forests, stressed out animals, plants and humans, as well as melting glaciers on the mountains are the results. A prime example for the change in our environment are the dying spruce forests that are not able to defend themselves against the bark beetles because of ongoing periods of drought. And then there are times when the weather goes completely crazy, with storms and heavy rain throughout the whole summer. The catastrophe in the Ahr Valley is still in our heads, isn't it? The damage on our agriculture is already becoming expensive for the governments, as weather is becoming less and less predictable. Will the winter be warm or ice cold? Will the summer be rainy or break the next heat record? Who knows? This causes an instability on the market, and prices, not only in the sector of agriculture, will go up. In conclusion, with every degree the world heats up, life, even in the moderate regions, will become incredibly more difficult, as water and food and materials for everyday use are getting more and more rare. But let's continue our journey
and dive into the depths of the sea. About 70% of the Earth's surface are covered in water. Giant oceans inhabit billions of animals and plants. Obviously, the sea has a huge impact on the life on land as well. It supplies food like fish to us humans, and the coastal regions are home to many people. But this might change soon, because the global warming does not stop on land. And even if the changes on the sea are often not visible at first sight, they are undeniable. Due to the melting of the poles, water levels will go up in the future. Scientists estimated a rise of 82 centimeters till the end of the century. This maybe doesn't sound like very much, but it will certainly destroy the homes of millions of people. In addition, the general temperature of the oceans is going up too. This is a process that is progressing pretty slowly, but it will take way more time to adjust itself again. This means that we have settled the future of our planet's seas for thousands of years to come. Dying species and coral reefs, collapse of the food chain, and shifting habitats for remaining animals result from the rising sea temperature. But the list of tragedies goes on. Every hour, around 1 million tons of CO2 is getting absorbed by the seas, which is an incredible amount. Whilst this process is good for stopping the climate change, it has horrible outcomes for marine life. The more CO2 gets in contact with water, the more acidic the water gets, because of chemical processes. This will make the oceans more and more deadly. It is estimated that the sea will get 150% more acidic in 2100 than it was in the year 1800. And even more terrifying is the fact that this process can only regulate itself naturally over the course of tens of thousands of years, and we humans can't do anything against it. Side effects like hurricanes and floods will of course become more frequent.
Climate change is a serious issue that affects our planet. It's the long-term alteration of the Earth's climate system, mainly due to human activities. To understand climate change, we need to look back at history, starting with the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution began in the 18th century and brought significant changes to the way people lived. New technologies powered by fossil fuels like coal and oil were invented, leading to increased production in factories and the growth of transportation. These advancements greatly improved people's lives, but they also had unintended consequences for the environment. Burning fossil fuels releases greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. As industrial activities intensified, the amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere increased, leading to global warming and climate change. In the 20th century, scientists began to study the effects of human activities on the climate. Their research showed that the Earth's temperature was rising at an alarming rate. This prompted international concerns and governments around the world to start taking action to address the issue. In 1992, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, short UNFCCC, was established. The UNFCCC aimed to stabilize greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere and prevent dangerous human interference with the climate system. It became the primary international forum for negotiations on climate change. One of the most important agreements under the UNFCCC is the Kyoto Protocol. Adopted in 1997, the Kyoto Protocol committed developed countries to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. It set specific targets for emission reduction and introduced mechanisms to promote clean technologies and support developing countries in their efforts to address climate change. Another significant agreement is the Paris Agreement, reached in 2015. The Paris Agreement brought together nearly all countries in the world to combat climate change. Its main goal is to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels and to pursue efforts to limit the temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius. The agreement also promotes international cooperation in adapting to the impacts of climate change and providing financial support to developing countries. Since the Paris Agreement, many countries have taken steps to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions and transition to renewable energy sources. Efforts are being made to increase energy efficiency, promote sustainable transportation, and protect forests and other natural resources. In addition to the Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement, there are several other important international agreements and initiatives aimed at addressing climate change. One of the agreements is the Montreal Protocol, signed in 1987, focuses on phasing out the production and use of substances that deplete the ozone layer. The Montreal Protocol has been successful in reducing ozone-depleting substances and has indirect benefits for climate change mitigation. There's also the Global Climate Action Summit. The Global Climate Action Summit is a global gathering that takes place annually, bringing together leaders from various sectors to showcase climate action and initiatives. These agreements and initiatives, along with many others, demonstrate the global commitment to addressing climate change and finding solutions. However, addressing climate change is an ongoing challenge. It requires collective action and long-term commitment from governments, businesses, and individuals worldwide. Education and awareness play crucial roles in encouraging sustainable practices and finding innovative solutions to mitigate the impacts of climate change. By understanding the history of climate change and the agreements made to combat it, the world can work together to protect our planet for future generations.
Antarctica. A continent bigger than Europe stores about 80% of all the ice in the world. Icebergs as high as the Alp Mountains sit enthroned over the biggest ice desert in the world. But this eternal ice is not as eternal as many people think. Rising temperatures lead to the melting of huge areas and the slow but steady destruction of Antarctica. On the other side of the world, the situation is even far worse. The average temperature in the Arctic is rising quicker than anywhere else on the world. It is expected to reach positive 6 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. Every year, the ice sheet is melting in summer and growing back in the winter. This is a normal phenomenon, but in the last decade it shifted to an unnatural extent. Nowadays, the Arctic does not only shrink in size but also in width, which makes the ice sheet thinner and therefore more prone to storms and rain, causing it to melt even faster. In September 2012, the minimum size of the ice sheet was only half as big as the average minimum size from 1979 to the year 2000. A scenario of pure horror is the end of the whole Arctic ice in the next decades. But why are the poles even this important? Well, first of all, the white color of the snow reflects sunlight pretty effectively, so that the heat gets thrown back into space. And obviously, the ice naturally cools down the planet as well. But there are many more benefits of the poles that could go lost when they disappear. The weather of the whole globe is mostly controlled by giant streams in the atmosphere and the oceans. For example, the jet stream or the Gulf Stream. The Gulf Stream is the reason why we in Europe have a mild climate, since it delivers warm water and warm air from the Gulf of Mexico in the south to the North Atlantic. Then the water cools down at the North Pole and becomes heavier, causing it to sink to depths of 4,000 meters below sea level. In the deep ocean it travels back to the south, where the circle starts again. If Antarctica melts away, huge amount of stored freshwater will mix with salt water in the ocean. The problem is that freshwater is not as dense as saltwater, and as a result, the Gulf Stream will not be able to sink down as deep anymore. And then the whole system could slow immensely, and Europe could become extremely cold again. Another important part of northern ice are the permafrost soils in Canada and Siberia. They contain giant amounts of dead plants and animals from the last hundreds of thousands of years. If the ground melts down, those remains will be exposed to the sun and the atmosphere, and they will start rotting. All in all, more than twice as much CO2 as we have currently in our atmosphere would arise, which would be the end of all hope. It is becoming clear that we must protect our poles at all costs.
When you look at the world, you can see large deserts that spread around the northern and southern tropic. These are the areas where trade winds deliver dry air to the ground, and this lack of rain, combined with the heat near the equator, causes deserts. Climate change therefore has a large impact on the world's deserts, as heat becomes hotter and droughts become even drier. Every year, deserts on Earth are growing about 70,000 square kilometers, which is about the size of Ireland. This is a huge problem for the countries primarily in Africa and on the Arabian Peninsula. Towns and villages become uninhabitable as the ground is slowly turning into sand and all the water vanishes. One sad example are the rivers Euphrates and Tigris in Iraq. Years ago they were the center of life, with lots of cities around, but nowadays barely anyone lives there anymore. The reason is simple: not enough water for the citizens and by far not enough water for agriculture and animals. Iraq nowadays is not even able to provide enough water for 10% of the population. These are the problems most southern countries will face in the future, not only in Africa but in Europe as well. With that, there will certainly be wars breaking out, with water or food as the only goals. Climate refugees will migrate to the north, causing huge problems like overpopulation. And in the end, the heat will cause an unimaginable number of deaths.
The natural process that helps the Earth to keep warm is called the greenhouse effect. It works like a blanket around the planet. Certain gases in the Earth's atmosphere, called greenhouse gases, trap heat from the sun and keep it from escaping into space. This makes the Earth's surface and atmosphere warmer than they would be otherwise. The main greenhouse gases are carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and water vapor. These gases can absorb and release heat energy. When sunlight reaches the Earth, some of it is reflected back into space, but the rest warms up the planet's surface. The warm surface then emits heat energy in the form of infrared radiation. Greenhouse gases in the atmosphere absorb some of this infrared radiation and send it back to the Earth's surface. This process makes the surface even warmer. The greenhouse effect is important because it helps regulate the Earth's temperature. Without it, the planet would be much colder and inhospitable to life. However, human activities like burning fossil fuels and cutting down forests have been increasing the amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. This extra amount is causing the Earth to warm up more than it should.
Right now, we are experiencing a warming of about 1.1 degrees Celsius, which emerged after the Industrial Revolution. Throughout this documentary, we've had the opportunity to take a look at the effects this amount of warming is causing to our planet. But what if we increase the temperature even more and take a look at the time yet to come? 1.5 degrees Celsius. The sea level is rising even more rapidly. A lot of islands like the Solomon Islands as well as the Maldives are vanishing under the ocean. Until we reach the year 2050, 70% of all coral reefs have died and disappeared. The probability of flood disasters has doubled. But let's live up to our title, 2 degrees of warming. By now, nearly all coral reefs have disappeared. This leads to a lack of necessary food, shelter, and as a result of that, shrinking biodiversity. While the world underwater is suffering catastrophic consequences, the land continues to heat up. The Arctic will have an ice-free summer every 10 years. Therefore, the Earth is losing one of its protective shields, which leads to even more heat. A vicious circle. One might ask oneself, is there even hope for humanity? For humanity, there most likely is. Humans have been able to adapt to lots of environmental changes throughout history. In fact, statistically, humans are more prone to die from extreme cold than from extreme heat. However, climate change can cause several other problems, like for example the rising sea levels, which will lead to some of us having to leave our homes and move further away from the water. While the water can cause us problems on the one hand, we might not get enough of it on the other. Only 0.5% of water on Earth is considered freshwater, but even that supply will most probably shrink due to a rise in heat waves. Climate change is not primarily about us humans, but about the things that are happening around us, the animals, plants and ecosystems that are crumbling in front of our eyes. Regarding our future on this planet, there's still much to do. And opinions differ on how we will get these problems solved. And instead of focusing on the problem itself, spreading panic and anger, leading to only more trouble, we should probably focus on the solutions that will get this problem solved. We should focus on innovations and working together, not against each other. We should create art, not destroy it. And for the whole picture to change, we should change as individuals as well. Sacrifice today will usually end up with a better future tomorrow.